With the advent of Trump, relations between the United States and Canada have become more tense than ever before. The conflict was initiated by U.S. President Donald Trump from the first days of his second term began to put pressure on Canada, threatening it with tariffs and economic destruction. Trump has also repeatedly referred to Canada as the 51st state and literally threatened to annex territories. In this issue, we will discuss what would happen if the United States were to annex Canada. The very question of annexing Canada has been raised by the Americans on many occasions. Even during the War of Independence, the Americans invaded Quebec during one of their campaigns, but were driven out by the British. The Founding Fathers planned to include the lands of Canada in their new state, but only 13 colonies managed to gain independence. Interestingly, the Loyalists, Americans who fought on the side of the British Crown, fled to Canada after the Revolution and found refuge there. The Second War took place in 1812, again in the context of the confrontation between the British and the Americans. The battles were quite fierce. For example, the city of York, modern Toronto, was burned, but in the end Canada was not captured and the status quo was preserved. Border conflicts also arose during the 19th century. The border between the countries was not clearly defined. A number of politicians at the time advocated the annexation of Canada in one form or another. Such sentiments increased especially after the British Crown supported the Confederacy during the Civil War. In 1867, Canada itself became a dominion, which meant an expansion of its autonomy and the first attempts to create its own identity. The border between the countries was finally established only in 1908. Recently, Trump, referring to this act, said that it is not valid. In the early 20th century, close economic contacts were established between the parties and a free trade agreement was signed. Interestingly, even then, many Canadians were against it, fearing economic dependence on the United States. The United States had separate relations with the Dominion of Newfoundland. Today it is a part of Canada, but before 1949 it was a separate dominion. The Americans had their own interests in the region, such as military bases and economic contacts, but they were not particularly eager to annex it. According to the results of the referendum, the Dominion will eventually join the Canadian Confederation. So the story of Canadian lands within the United States is not new, and Trump has decided to reactivate this issue. Turning to the issue of annexation, there are several ways to carry it out. Annexation by military means would be a difficult task even for the United States. The Canadian population is generally quite hostile to such an idea, so it will not welcome Americans with flowers. Of course, the military capabilities of the countries are not comparable, but this could even turn into a protracted guerrilla war. Canada is home to 40 million people and the second largest country in the world. Most of the territory is in a difficult terrain with many lakes and mountains, as well as perpetual frost. Capturing this territory is not easy, nor is further controlling it. Therefore, the U.S. Army could theoretically plunge into a long war and not control the entire territory. The reaction of the NATO bloc is also unclear. Both countries are members of the alliance, but Russia and China would be happy to take advantage of such a war and would definitely help the resistance movement in Canada in one form or another. If Trump is really determined about this, economic pressure may work, even though it will hit the United States itself. A literal trade war between the two countries has recently begun with the introduction of mutual tariffs. Of course, the American economy is also experiencing negative effects, but even in the medium term, Canada will bear the brunt of the damage. 71% of Canadian exports go to the United States and 51% of imports. Such a colossal dependence on one market can lead to a real economic collapse, and then Canada can accept any ultimatum, purely in theory. The issue of a referendum is also likely, but it is unlikely to lead to a positive scenario for the United States. According to polls, Canadians do not want to be part of the United States, and the ruling party's ratings are growing due to the conflict with Trump. What will happen if the United States does somehow annex Canada? On the positive side, the United States would increase its territory, population, and economy. Canada is a large country with a population of 40 million, a vast territory with many mineral resources. Annexation of such territory will create favorable conditions for the United States to further fight China, which is also in Trump's plans, and will give the Americans an advantage in various areas. Moreover, Canada has significant reserves of rare earth metals and is already quite actively engaged in their development. Trump, as it has become clear, is very interested in this issue because of America's dependence on supplies from China. Rare earth metals are widely used in the military industry today, which is why this resource is so valuable to the United States. Canada's economy is also quite large. Canada has been among the top 10 countries in terms of GDP for several years now. The projected annual GDP for 2025 is $2.3 trillion, which is higher than the GDP of Brazil and Russia, but slightly lower than the GDP of Italy. Given that Canada's economy is already dependent on the U.S. economy, even greater integration will bring additional economic benefits. A separate topic is access to the Arctic, which Trump also sees as a strategically important task. The region is seen as a strategically important point for the future. The United States wants to strengthen its military influence in the region and compete with Russia, which already has extensive access to the Arctic. At the same time, the issue of Arctic resources may become critically important for world powers in a few decades. That is why the largest countries are already paying serious attention to this region. Even China, which has no access to the Arctic, is interested in influencing the region. In fact, Trump's rhetoric on Greenland is aimed at the same reasons. The negative effects include a violation of the status quo and the loss of allies. The United States is already the dominant power in the world today, and the existing world order is indeed benefiting it. Trying to change it could lead to a collapse and leave the United States in a weaker position. Annexation of Canada could set a negative precedent, especially if it is done through an ultimatum rather than voluntarily. Allies of the Americans will doubt their security and look for alternatives. These alternatives could be Russia or China, or the creation of a separate entity. The European Union could also turn its back on the United States. The global consensus would be broken, and the United States would be the loser. That is why such steps do not seem very serious today, although the people of Canada are indeed extremely concerned. The very annexation of Canada will not benefit the Republicans and will literally lead to their failure in the elections. Trump has repeatedly called Canada the 51st state. If Canada is annexed, it will become the largest state in America. Today, California is the largest state in terms of population, with 39 million people. Canada is now home to 40 million people. Since the number of voters in American elections is determined by the population of the state, we can assume that the state of Canada will have approximately the same number of voters as California, 54, and this state is likely to be Democratic. In Canada, the population already favors left-wing forces, and after the annexation, they will vote even more against the Republicans in protest. Such an electoral picture will simply lead to the Democrats constantly winning elections because of the imbalance. Generally speaking, the last time states were added to the United States was in 1959, when 2 states were included, Alaska and Hawaii. The first was for the Republicans and the second was for the Democrats. The decision to include the 2 states was made precisely because of balance considerations. The states complemented each other. With the annexation of Canada, the balance will be destroyed. To summarize, the annexation of Canada could bring economic and resource benefits to the United States. At the same time, the United States may lose its allies, and the Republicans, through the state of Canada, are unlikely to be able to come to power again. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel to not miss new videos.
I never answer to no, man, I still go.